Good morning. This week's Parsha is Parshat Balak. Balak, as the Torah states, Vaya Balak ben Tzipor ekol asher asa Yisrael la'amori. Balak was the son of Tzipor, and he became frightened because he had seen all that God had done towards the enemies of Israel. And he sent messages to Midian to Bilam ben Baal. These are the two principal characters in this story. For both of them were going to make an attempt to weaken, if not annihilate, the children of Israel. And then we have a long story as to how they were proceeding to accomplish this feat and how they failed and why they failed, etc. The story is just that. It's a story. It does not indicate to any extent just who these two people were, except the fact that they were called the enemies of Israel. But as we have learned in the Zohar, that stories in the Torah are merely references by which we can glean information, not just information, historical information, but information as to how this information can be readily used by ourselves, because, as I will shortly read from the Zohar, we are not discussing today an enemy of Israel and how they failed, because it's an incredible story. Well, that part is correct. Nevertheless, the story seems to provide no reference to how the people of Israel, or for that matter, the world, can make use of the results of this story, or more importantly, who were these people? Were these two people that when they died, so did two enemies of Israel die, or was there a deeper implication? And of course, the Zohar treating every story as a coding for and concealment of the information and knowledge, information that could be applied and made use of, and consequently become knowledge for us today. And I begin off with the first Zohar concerning Bilam ben Baor hargu becherev. This is a Zohar which precedes, but actually I should take you into who these people were first, and so we can get an idea as to what we are and with whom we are dealing. If I were to summarize in a word, who are these people? I would say, in modern terminology, we are discussing Murphy's Law. Murphy's Law, which states that if anything can go wrong, it will go wrong. If there are several things that can go wrong, the one that would be have a more severe consequence will go wrong. Indicating from this accepted law and principle that there are forces in this world which are summarized by this law that says things can go wrong, they will go wrong. Well, in life, are there instances when things cannot go wrong? There's always the chance. There's always the uncertainty. We even live by an uncertainty law. In fact, history and up until the present time, we live in this fear of uncertainty. Nothing has changed. In fact, we're always under the impression that things are certain, although there is an uncertainty law that has become part of our life's existence. There are no disagreements as to the uncertainty law. Well, if there are 5 billion people in the world, there are 5 billion testimonies that state that if anything can go wrong, it will go wrong. So from our actual experience, we've come to learn that things go wrong. Why they go wrong? Well, each individual considers and observes that which goes wrong within him, thinking only he has become vulnerable to this idea of if anything can go wrong, it will go wrong. As if when he observes, if he has now undergone financial distress or crisis or failure, he then looks around and says, well, it's me. It struck me, but insofar as everybody else is concerned, or insofar as many other people are concerned, this doesn't seem to apply. Only me. And yet, from what we will understand in the Zohar, this enemy, which only in our time has been referred to as Murphy's Law, is a very real force in our lives. And so long as we are not aware of this idea that there is a force, but rather that, and which Murphy's Law relates to, is the consequences. Not that there are forces in the world that are standing by, ready to strike us down, chas v'shalom, at the first opportunity that is presented. Again, people assume, most people in the world assume, that things go well until something happens. Nobody anticipates anything going wrong. That's the first mistake. Although there is a law of Murphy, there's a law of uncertainty, and we are not conscious of the fact that these laws exist. The Zohar takes it one step further and says these are not just laws, but these are living demonstrative forces that create chaos in our lives. They are the ones that create the uncertainty. Not that uncertainty is a result of some consequence. When things are going bad, now what do I do? And at that moment, the uncertainty arises. Now what do we do? Rather than think that what brought about this scenario that now I say, what do I do, was already involved in the root and in the origin as to how this uncertainty came about. Because there was a force called uncertainty brought about the event of uncertainty, the physical representation, the physical portrayal of uncertainty. And as long as we remain in the consciousness that when the physical experience brings about uncertainty, that's what has to be dealt with. then we have failed to remove the cause of uncertainty, because uncertainty is a force. Uncertainty is not a result of a situation, of an experience now that, what do I do? But rather that idea to place me into a consciousness of what do I do is called uncertainty. And this is what the Torah is dealing with. Therefore, the Torah presents it as a physical experience, something that took place between Jews, Balak, and Bilam. And along comes the Zohar and says, no, they are merely people or figures or characters that represent ideas, represent forces that exist in the world. Whether these people, Balak and Bilam, disappear and never come into, and never reappear again, has nothing to do with the fact that there are forces in the world, and those are the forces that have to be dealt with. So I read from the Zohar on page 100 in Parshat Balak. Atzotav hem al Yisrael, going on these people, on the evil people. Balak u'Bilam achuz achzu oto hadavar mamash. Shel, Sam, I don't want to say out his full name, v'siyato. It was not Balak and Bilam, says the Zohar, that were coming here to cause trouble for the Jews, because people, physical people, have no power, as we've learned continuously and consistently in the Zohar. It's not evil people that we are to fear. When there have been enemies that have risen against the Jews, and it's not only against the Jews, but it's against all of mankind. It's not only the Jews that have suffered over the years. That when that event takes place, we then relate to the physical people supposedly perpetrating the evil. Says the Zohar, from the very beginning, not to interpret that the people, these two individuals, Balak and Bilam, were the enemies of Israel. They, by and within themselves, were not the enemies. They were enemies only because, says the Zohar, they knew how to put to use the power of evil, or what we call uncertainty, the power that can create chaos in the world. They were in a position, because of their knowledge, because of their internal structure, on how to take these forces that create havoc in the world and bring them to bear to wherever they felt that was their mission. In this case, Balak and Bilam had a mission. Because since the Jews were now representing, after having received the Torah, representing how, the teachings of how to take the positive forces, or what we say the light force of God, and put that to use, to light, illuminate. They knew that as long as the light force of God could illuminate, then the forces of darkness, which is referred to as evil, but it is the forces of darkness. It is darkness that is the enemy, not evil. Evil is the result. Evil represents chaos. Evil represents illness. Evil represents Holocaust. These are the results of forces that bring about the physical expression of evil. But the force behind evil is darkness. And therefore, this war that took place between Balak and Bilam and the Jews, is not a war between nations of who would conquer, etc. On the contrary, if there is light, there is no darkness. If all we would concentrate upon is how we can bring the force of light to dominate, there would be nothing more to worry about. Well, what about the havoc, and what about the chaos, and what about all of the evil that seems to be rampant in the whole world? They would disappear. No less than when we flip a switch and the darkness disappears. Uncertainty disappears. But more so if we're discussing the light force of God, then the evil that originates and becomes manifest from the force called darkness, or Samach Mem, as the angel of darkness is referred to, the force of darkness, a force that if it is brought into dominion and the light force is requested to move away, because if you remember, we have to always bear in mind that is part of a necessary consciousness. Unlike what Jews think, God, where were you when I needed you most? And if we remain with that consciousness that God, where were you when we needed you most? Then we have absolutely no chance, never. The proof is on my side. 2,000 years, if you want to go back to Cain and Abel, where maybe it's continued from that period on, there is no chance to eliminate evil from our midst. And so the scenario changes every 50 years, every 100 years. People, different faces, maybe different countries. It will never, never disappear. Because we learned that because of the concept of bread of shame, God was forced by our decision of bread of shame to request from God that unless I can earn, or I can work, or I can develop the light, your light, God, from constantly illuminating my surroundings, my environment, my world, you are not to interfere. You are not to illuminate unless I earn it, unless I request it and earn it. So the idea of where's God? Why is there darkness? But until you flip the switch, whatever is in that room, if there are a couple of chairs that are going to be in your path to get to the other end of the room where you want to get, because maybe that's where the switch is. As you walk in, you know the switch is at the other end of the room. You live in uncertainty. But the uncertainty of not knowing where the chairs are is because the light is lacking in that room. And therefore, rather than be involved in God, rather than be involved in the dark Lord, as I refer to them, like Balaam and Balak, who only have brought the forces of Samach Mem, the forces that create evil in the world, the forces that create an atmosphere of darkness. Where is darkness? As I've said last Shabbat, when we flip a switch, the darkness disappears. If I close the lights, where did darkness come from? He's back as soon as the light disappears. No time. No split second, indicating, as we will learn, that darkness does not disappear. That will only come when there is a collective consciousness of all people, that all we have to do is bring the light. And as I've said on many occasions, the Anavakah, which is the most singular, powerful structure of words that can draw the light into our midst, but many Jews never even recite it. By those who even do recite the words of Anavakah, don't know why and what is the purpose of the Anavakah. But if the whole world would decide to do an Anavakah, the infusion of the light would be so intense, because there is no other prayer. There is no other prayer that is as powerful as the Anavakah. Well, you might say, well, what about the Kriyat Shema? What about the Kriyat Shema? Purpose of the Kriyat Shema has a very defined purpose, very specific. Very specific. There are 248 bone sections in our body. And we know that the bone creates marrow. And we know that marrow is the essence of our immune system. And so we pray this most powerful prayer called Kriyat Shema provides the infusion of the light force where? Where? Into those bones, so as to reinforce the marrow, so as to reinforce our immune system, because without an immune system, it's all over with. Every illness that exists in the world, not only cancer and AIDS, but a cold, every illness is because there is either a breakdown in our immune system or the immune system is weak. So there is a specific function. And of course for the body, this is the most important prayer. However, that is directing the light force to illuminate, meaning to rid the immune system in my body from any darkness that can obstruct the process of creating marrow and the process of creating a perfect immune system. However, when you talk about the Anavakah, you are referring to a universal, when I say universal, I don't mean universal for all peoples. I'm referring to a prayer that reaches into every region of this universe and the 250 other universes that Rabbi Shimon exist. It goes beyond the local necessity that is needed so as to improve, enhance my physical condition. And the purpose of the Anavakah is for what? Because it can reach into every region where the Dark Lord exists. Because he is the problem. Sam is the problem. Samach Mem. Not the problem is the disease or the financial failure. That is the result of someone or somehow the force of Samach Mem, this angel who has the wherewithal to harness this force called darkness that doesn't disappear just because I flipped the switch on, but must vacate the premises as long as the light illuminates. And the moment the light disappears, He's back there, because both cannot coexist together. And therefore the problem that we want to face and to realize as the origin of our problems is this week's Parsha. So it says that Balak and Bilam knew how to make use and knew how to harness this force of Sam and all of his assistants. What did they do? Then, what they did was to accumulate evil. They knew how to bring and accumulate this force of Sam and his assistants. How do we know that? Says the Zohar. Hu otiot Amalek. Amalek, as we have learned, has the same numerical value as uncertainty. Uncertainty. There we learn. What science only recently has discovered, by whatever method, not that they understand it, they do not understand it. They know theoretically it's correct, but do not understand what uncertainty means. For them, they can't predict tomorrow. Can't predict tomorrow. Who knows what will happen tomorrow? For them, that's what uncertainty it means for us. And for us, uncertainty, safek is a force. Is a force. It is not the result of, now that I have a situation, and what do? You go ask an economist, you go ask maybe sometime even a rabbi, or you ask a doctor, what do I do? That is not the uncertainty we are discussing. That is the uncertainty physics discusses, because they haven't got the knowledge or the ability to understand that there is a force called uncertainty that creates conditions by which then we express the idea of uncertainty. Amalek, the enemy of Israel, enemy of mankind. Enemy of mankind. And we know why the Torah refers to Amalek and the Jews. What about the rest of the people in the world? They do not fall under this evil known as Amalek. You mean there are no illnesses amongst non-Jews, no financial distress or failure amongst non-Jews? All of the problems that Jews have are not, or never occur by non-Jews? Of course not. Everything that happens with Jews happens with non-Jews. But because we know that the Jew, because of his particular makeup, can bring greatest amount of illumination by his anabakoa, so too, evil expressions, evil activity of the Jew brings about the ultimate of Amalek, the enemy. He brings about uncertainty. How does he bring about uncertainty? He brings about the presence of darkness in the room. He closes the light. He has a greater ability to close the light, just as he has a greater ability to put on the light. So Amalek, Dahainu Am, Shalakta Otam Kenachash Hamakeh Bizanav Shalo. Just like the snake beats. Am, Lak. Am, nation. Lak is from the word to beat. Hareyanu yotem mimenu. Ki Balak hu otiot Balak. In other words, the name Balak is a code. Balak. He contained these two letters. Lak, which means beat. Dahainu sheba mi shalaka otam kiritzono. He encapsulated. He encapsulated the expression, the beating of Amalek, that part. And Bilam, hu otiot bal am, dahainu einam ve'ein ro'eh Hashem shalanu, gorim lekalotom lakrem im olam. Bal in Aramaic means without. Balam, einam. In other words, just as when we flip the switch to an off position, what is the power of the darkness? What is the power of the darkness? It can remove the illumination that was present. You can imagine a power to remove illumination. You want to know what to do. You can't know what to do because the power of illumination was removed. Now you want to know, so what do I do? You go to an economist, you go, no economist, no doctor, no lawyer, no anybody can remove this darkness unless they know how to bring the forces of darkness to bear. So what we have here is in the name of Bilam, we have the word Am, Ayin Mem, and the Lamed Kuf of Balak. So what we find, that these two people represent the totality, two halves of the totality of uncertainty. Meaning, darkness. Meaning, there's no illumination. And if there's no illumination, just as I indicated in the Kriyat Shema, if there's no illumination of the light force, and that's what the Kriyat Shema is about, then what happens? What's going wrong? What is this thing called deterioration, whether it be in a business, whether it be within the physical body of an individual? It is the disappearance. The force of Am, the force of Bilam, to make light move aside. There is no illumination. Once illumination does not exist, then the force of darkness, not just, what do I do now? I don't see it. I can't see my way out of this. That is not the problem because I can't see. The problem is because there is a presence of darkness. Darkness is not something that means the absence of light. Darkness represents the forces of Samach Mem. And these two people know or channel these two forces. What is the expression? What is the expression that ultimately manifests itself? In other words, there's a force of being beaten. A person is beaten by his creditors. Sometimes a person in a hospital is beaten by the physicians. What do you mean he's beaten? They don't know what to do. They cut here, cut there, cut this. They're beating. When they don't know what they're doing, what are they doing? They may be cutting off vital supplies that they themselves are not aware of. I mean, in surgery, we know they cut most times indiscriminately, thinking, well, I don't see the purpose of this, so I can cut this away. That may be a vital link to something. What they're doing is beating away at the person. That was the power of Balak. The force of Bilam is the annihilation. The annihilation. He begins the process, he finishes the process. So in any tragedy, in any situation that we consider to be evil, that we consider to be destructive, we're dealing with two aspects that are taking place. And if our consciousness, and this is what the Zohar, and that's what the Torah wants to teach us, once we have a consciousness of the existence of these two forces, Bilam and Balak, this is what the whole story is about. And then it begins to even emerge as something of a beautiful story, because we won't have time this morning to read the story, but I urge you at least even just the translation, which doesn't give you anything as to insofar as the substance is concerned. But you can begin to interpret what they were doing. You can begin to interpret what they were doing, their methodology and so on. Because it is this methodology by how we can recognize their penetration into our bodies, their penetration into our business. Everything that is outlined in this parsha is not the story. It is a clear demonstration of how the process, of how the procedure in any breakdown takes place, whether it be financial, whether it be social relationships, or whether it be in health. This is the process. This is how it takes place. Kadosh Baruch Hu chashe ba'ofen acher et shmotam, ki bebalak yesh bal ubebilam yesh bal. In both names, we have a bet lamed. Bilam, the first two, is bet lamed, and the second is bet lamed. Balak and Bilam, bet lamed, bet lamed. Ukashem yechad. B'nei Bilbul. What do you get from bet lamed in Hebrew? Bilbul, confusion. That is the result. That is the result from when they bring these forces, these two forces, to bear on any situation. They create Bilbul. Umahem האותיות שנשארו בהילקח מהם האותיות בלבול. What happens when you take away these two letters, bet lamed of both names? Hem omek. דהיינו א' מ' בלם וקוף מ' בלק. בצירוף זה יגרום לבלבול עומק. Confusion. There is some confusion. Where am I? What street am I supposed to be on? Confusion. And then what happens? Many a time, I got it. So the confusion there was temporary. Confusion there was for a moment. But when you have these two people, Bilam and Balak, you then have Bilbul Omek. Says the Zohar, "Hamachshava shalem shelo yishlutu ba'olam v'lo yashiru ba'olam." That nothing will remain that could be classified as certainty. They assure that event, whether it be health. Unfortunately, if they become dominant. If they become dominant in any situation, it's omek. Nothing remains except this force. And it goes to show you, Amar Rabbi Shimon, Elazar, this was his son, Elazar, who gave us this interpretation. And I want to repeat again, after all, It's nice what Rabbi Shimon is saying. It's nice the way he explains the Parsha for us, the purpose of the Parsha. But if we don't understand the rules, if we do not have a consciousness of what makes up chaos, then there is absolutely no chance to eliminate the consciousness, because it's our consciousness, according to science, and certainly according to the Zohar, this recognition that this is the forces that we have to deal with, not the force of cancer as we observe it. It's not the problem. That is already Bilam coming out to, or the combination of both coming out to finish off the process. But it is their consciousness. The harnessing, when I say conscious, meaning this metaphysical force, being aware that in this individual, in this scenario, whatever it might be, the forces of Bilam and Balak have taken place, and the objective is not to call in the accountant first, not to call in the doctor first, not to call in a marriage counselor first, but to begin to understand how Balak and Bilam are present. And if I cannot ascertain how did they penetrate, and that's important too, how were they able to break through a natural shield that is created with most individuals in the world. And when these shields are for a moment open, maybe no wider than the opening of the eye of a needle, and to permit these forces to enter, then it's our objective to remove the forces. Because as long as you don't remove the forces, and that's why every physician will never guarantee that he's cut away the entire cancer or he's removed the entire sickness. Can't give you no guarantees. Why? Because maybe it'll reoccur. Why will it reoccur? So he's telling you, I have the power to remove the manifestation of a force. I do not have the power to remove the force that's bringing about the chaos. And so the first step in any situation that represents itself as in the form of chaos should not be directed towards the chaos. If I didn't say not to bring in a physician, I did not say do not bring in an accountant or someone or a consulting firm as to what's wrong, but understand, no consulting firm will guarantee you the results. You know how I know? Because a consulting firm that knows what they're doing should tell the client that, listen, if what I am recommending for the business doesn't work out, I give you back the money you paid me. Oh, I heard a murmur in the whole room all of a sudden. Oh, you mean that's what they should do? Well, they're telling you how they can eliminate your problem. And certainly the same is true for a doctor, who after the operation receives his $20 or $30 or $40,000, depending on how severe the operation or how long it took. If it took 12, 15, 18 hours, the fee is larger. And then you come to him and you say, but remember, if you haven't succeeded, I want the money back. Unheard of. Unheard of. The reason he cannot, or anyone cannot assure you of the result, is because they're telling you, I can only deal with what is. But something that may have caused the situation is beyond his scope of thinking. We're being told now that the scope of thinking, the scope of chaos, originates not with the problem, but with forces with forces known as Balak and Bilam. They were capable, and there are people around. Not people who are even bent on bringing chaos in the world, but there are people who look at everything in a negative way. There are people born with the natural characteristic of gloom and doom. Those people you have to stay away from. Because that gloom and doom is again evidence of this person having been infiltrated somehow. And now what he's doing is festering the same idea. And therefore people really prefer not being around individuals who are negative or of gloom and doom, because that has overtaken those people who are. And that's not the only situation where we could be vulnerable, we could be exposed to these two forces called Balak and Bilam. Amar Oto Rasha. And he said that Bilam Rucho Nishchaken Kachu Eitzara Lachu Ala Magen Shel Yisrael. What did he do? Eitzara meaning an evil advisement, but it's not, Eitzah is not, when someone gives advice, again, we must understand what the Zohar means when he uses the word Eitzah, advice. People give advice. Some people can give wrong advice. Some people can give proper advice. Depending on the consciousness of the individual. And since Bilam was an evil individual, his advice, says the Zohar, could only be that which can manifest and continue the force of evil. The force of evil. And therefore, it's the principle in Kabbalah, you try to avoid or move away from people who are intrinsically evil, because their expression of evil, their expression of negativity only indicates to us, says the Zohar, that they have accumulated. They have accumulated the forces that create evil in the world. That they are evil. Why are they evil? Because within them, the forces of evil have come to bear. And Lachu al Hamagen Shel Yisrael. What were they attempting to do? To penetrate the shield of Israel. As I mentioned before, every person has an intrinsic shield. That's why most people in the world are born healthy. Most people in the world begin a business which seems to be successful. Most people do not fail immediately. It is only subsequently. Dahainu ala koch ohu shehi hashchina hanikrat ko. Because intrinsically we are born with the Shekhinah around us, every person, until such time as either we draw down negativity to ourselves, or we are subject, or we become vulnerable to the influences. What did he want to do, Bilam and Balak? What is the intention of the force of Balaam and Balak? To break down, to annihilate, lakor, at this natural security that God has created for each and every single individual that comes into this world. There are exceptions, but by and large, that's the way we all come in to this world. And therefore, once he could break down the shield, then with his power of the word and his power of action, he would then infiltrate the Jewish people. Amar Oto Rasha. What did he say? Harishonim ishtaglu v'lo yochlu. People before me, after all, Hitler said he was going to rule for 1,000 years. But wait a second, Hitler, you're a smart man. Yeah, he's pretty smart. Listen, how many guys before you, how many empires before you have continued for 1,000 years? Good question, he probably asked himself. Good question. Why would he be successful when everyone before him failed? Good question. That's the same question Bilam asked. But he said, there were generations like the Dor HaFlaga, the people of the building of the Tower of Babel. He answered it. Everyone can answer it. He said, well, the difference was that they created, through their actions, they created the infiltration of evil forces. However, it did not contain the power of the word. Fellow Hitler had both, not only action, but his power. I don't know, but this is what they say. He mesmerized the whole nation. Mesmerized the power of his speech. So Bilam said, I have the power of the words. Metukam bebeit stadim. And therefore he said, this will be different. Nachash, the snake, wherever we see snake, meaning that also encapsulates this force of evil. And therefore, he knew that he could succeed, because he now had both the force of action and the force of the word. But continues the Zohar. V'hu lo yada she'HaKadosh Baruch Hu meisir safa le'ne'emanim b'tam zekenim yikach v'akol omed b'rishuto. What he didn't understand was the following, and this is the lesson that we hope to learn, so when we come across a similar situation, we shall be conscious of really what's taking place, rather than just looking at the manifestation, at the symptom, and then raising the question, how do we deal with that symptom? In the Dor HaFlaga, shebilbu lishonam shelo yishlutu b'dibur klal. What was the reason why they failed, the people of the Tower of Babel? Bilbeil lishonam. They no longer had the control over the force of the word. And therefore, he said they didn't listen to him. But these two, Bilam and Balak, sheshneihim hayu be'etza achad, vayal Bilak u'Bilam pa va'ayil b'mizbeach. They were going to do the sacrifices, meaning the action, as sacrifices as we have learned in Kabbalah, that the sacrifices were the harnessing of energies. It was not just appeasing God, or, well, maybe I can't blame the Jews that interpret the sacrifices of the Jews on Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, whenever they brought the sacrifices, is to appease the wrath of God, because the answer is, there is no wrath of God. But doesn't it say, Isher Reach Nichoach LaHashem, to make it appealing? If it doesn't mean that, why should the Torah state in such a confusing manner as to lead us to believe that this is really for the reason of appeasing God? But when you interpret LaHashem the Yud Kei Vav Kei, as not God, because God doesn't need it, but that when these sacrifices took place, all they represented was flipping of the switch. No more, no less. Without going into the details as to how each sacrifice would flip the switch. Because what each sacrifice did was take the force, just as the power of the switch, not the light, the power of the switch somehow takes darkness and says, look, the light is now coming on. And you know that when the light is there, you have to vacate. That was the purpose of these sacrifices. That when these sacrifices were brought to bear, then it was Reich Nichoch L'Hashem. What do you mean? Then room was given, because as long as darkness is in the room, can't God come with the light and say, darkness, leave? No, it requires a flipping of the switch. Why does it require a flipping of the switch? Because the answer is, God cannot just come down and say, I want to make my presence felt at this moment. No. No. The darkness has to be taken and placed elsewhere or outside of the room, not annihilated, because the flip of the switch is indicative that we cannot rid ourselves just merely by flipping a switch of the darkness that prevails in the world. Can't. Because the fact that soon as we close the switch, darkness is back. We have not annihilated darkness. But these two here were looking for the opportunity by which both the action and their mouth would be able to pierce the security of Israel. The truth of the matter is, they couldn't. And therefore, at the end of the Parsha, we are told that the power of this force of darkness, Sam, Samach Mem, that power is only as strong as their ability to penetrate a weak security shield. In other words, with their mouth, with Bilam's mouth, and with Balak's action, they couldn't pierce the security shield. So at the end it says, they sent beautiful women, and that caused a sexual upheaval amongst the Jews, and so the Jews created a breakdown in their security shield, and only then could the plague take over. But the force of evil it could penetrate a room. It could not penetrate an individual, provided that individual causes a breakdown in the security shield. And furthermore, and again that is what Kabbalah is trying to teach us, that if there is chas v'shalom a breakdown, wherever that breakdown may occur, that if we can resume this encapsulation again, meaning there is an illumination or the presence of the light, we restore the natural encapsulation in our bodies. In fact, it's so strange when you speak to people who are knowledgeable in cancer. What is the difference between a benign tumor? It's so appropriate. What's the difference between a benign tumor or a cancerous tumor? They both have the same quality. One is encapsulated. The benign tumor is encapsulated. It's encapsulated. And it wants to break out. A cancer tumor breaks out of this encapsulation. So beautiful. Because as long as the totality of the collective consciousness of what we're discussing hasn't taken hold in this world, because meanwhile it's only the few like ourselves reading this Zohar that understands the principle. And therefore others have other ideas as to how to create shields, how to resuscitate a business that has failed, how to rejuvenate a body that has undergone severe illness. We are learning how to do that. You can encapsulate even the illness, and then the illness. As long as that encapsulation is strong enough, that's called a benign tumor. It's trying to break through, but this encapsulation is so powerful. Although the evil is there. The evil is there. But if it's encapsulated, that is what we do with the Anabakar. We want to restore our security shield, the natural security shield that we have. Well, maybe, person's in good health. His business is going well. Does he have to also do the Anabakar? He'll do it when Chas v'Sholom, the day may come. And the answer is, the evil, just like in cancer, does not express itself. It may take 20 years. It could be present. And if it is not encapsulated, then overnight it breaks out. Too late. Generally too late. It's already broken, that shield. And therefore the reason for doing the Ana B'Koach day in and day out is to encapsulate the evil. And that's what Pinchas did at the end, without getting into that story. And we learn something else. The Zohar wants to teach us about how do you recognize the enemy? Or how do you recognize the forces that create a breakdown or an affinity with a Balak and a Bilam today? Everything he did was with one thought: to create evil. As we know, in this world, we've come across many people who are just bent on evil. Kol ma'asav haya l'ra begabot halev. As the Zohar will explain, he felt he was somebody. V'oto rasha Bilam, hay meshabech atzmo, he always praised himself. V'yama et sheva mizbachot arachti va'al para va'al b'mizbeach. And I will prepare the sacrifices and everything else, because I know how to bring this power called Samach Mem to bear. But, says the Zohar, Vi elu et Balak lo shatafimo, and if Balak did not join together with him, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Rasha, Hakol Ani Yodea, El Shuv, El Balak, Vata Lo Tzarich Ledaber, El Bekot Tedaber. It's actually a repetition. And so, when he came, and with the 7 Mizbachot, which he created 7 altars, 7, because the Zohar says elsewhere that just as we learn 7 as to how to bring down or draw to ourselves the 7 aspects of the light force of God, which make up the whole, which make up a one unified unit, all of the 7 Sefirot, so too is the system of the Dark Lord, based on 7. Elo ve'elo, zelu mazeh asalakim. In other words, there are 7 and 7. 7 forces of evil, 7 forces of God, or of the light force. And, said God, but the ko tidaber, as much as you will talk, the ko, again, a code word for the Shekhinah. What is the Shekhinah? Shachen, our neighbor. Our neighbor. What is that neighbor? That is the natural security shield. The Shekhinah is what you might say is the interface between the light force and ourselves, just as we learned in Tammuz. The Shekhinah is not present. The natural interface, the natural filtering, in this case, of the intensity of the accumulation of the moon, just bearing its influence in one month, whereas all other months beside next month, the month of Av, all distribute their influence to 2 signs of the zodiac, meaning each influence is only 1/2 of the totality of the influence of the planet, whereas the moon and the sun, their influence is directed and concentrated towards one sign of the zodiac. And consequently, each sign of the zodiac, the month of Cancer and the sign of the zodiac of Leo, both receive the full concentration of the particular planet, and therefore, says the Zohar, these months are very powerful. Are they negative? Of course not. The light force of God is never negative. The problem is the Shekhinah is not present, says the Zohar in Shemot, when he discusses the verse that V'tis B'neo Shlosha Yerachim, when when Yocheved, the mother of Moses, concealed him, and the Zohar gleans from that code that there are 3 months in which the Shekhinah, this security shield. What do you mean a security shield? What does that mean? Oh, evil cannot penetrate. No, that's not the total definition. When the Shekhinah is present, just as we cannot make direct contact with the light force of God, can't put your finger in a switch. In a socket, I'm sorry. You can't put your finger in a socket. Get a shock. Because we're not equipped. We're not equipped to be able to handle direct current. Same way as in the month of Tammuz and Av, because the Shekhinah is not present, the Shekhinah creates that interface between ourselves and the light force of God. And because that ko, which is code word for Shekhinah, is not present, therefore we are vulnerable to this direct infusion of the light force of God, and therefore we can, not being in a position to handle it, we can create a great deal of negativity. But here God said, no, the ko is always present. Having that in mind, I thought I was going to read another one. I mentioned this in one of, I think it's in the Star Connection, the story of Tzilya, Shehipil et Bilam. Anhu Bilam. Where was Bilam when he failed and so on? What happened to him? Eifahaya Bilam ba'ot sha'a. In Toba b'Midyan, and if you say he ran away back to his country because he failed, v'arechotiv ata hineni holech la'ami, v'im halach lo mi natnu b'Midyan. Because it says that he was killed. But how was he killed? If he went back to Midyan, who went after him to kill him there? Umeshiv. And the Zohar answers, Ela oto rasha. But this evil man, Kevin Shadasha Naflu Kav Dalad Elef Mi Yisrael Bishvil Atzato, as I said in the end of the story, he realized that the forces of Balaam and Balak could not penetrate the Jews, since their security shield was so powerful that the forces of evil cannot penetrate when there is a security shield. However, that's when they sent the most beautiful women of Midian and created this breakdown of morality within the Jews. And what happened? A plague came, and 24,000 of the Jews died. Bishvil asato. Who was his vice? Was this to bring these women from Midian? It was Bilam himself. So he remained there. Now he wanted to exact payment from Balak, because it was Balak who said, I will pay you whatever your heart's desire if you can accomplish this feat of penetrating and destroying the Jews. And when they saw him there, Pinchas came together with the people who were with him. Came in Shara Bilam at Pinchas. When Bilam saw Pinchas, Parach Ba'avir. He literally flew up into the air. We're not familiar with that. We only hear maybe of the Ari who can fly. Maybe sometimes we hear maybe David Copperfield can fly occasionally. Well, we really don't believe that there is such a phenomena, although the Ari could, Rabbi Shimon could, and many Kabbalists could fly. So he flew. Ubeit banav imo, and he had his two sons, Yunus v'Yumbros. These two sons of his, the people who are responsible for the Jews, or convincing the Jews to make the golden calf, were the two sons of Bilam, Yunus and Yumbros. Kihemasu at the egel. So he says, but they died. How did he fly away? How does the Zohar say that Yunus v'Yumbros flew with their father to escape? Because Pinchas was coming to kill him. He knew that. And what did he do? He took off into the atmosphere. That's for sure. It says, at the time of the golden calf, that many people died approximately 3,000. I mean, 3,000 is not a phenomenon. It's not an undue amount that they couldn't count the bodies, says the Zohar. I mean, it was a small amount. Why does it have to say approximately? Why didn't they know exactly? I mean, when they counted the Jews, there were 147,231 in this tribe and so on. I mean, they had the exact amounts, says the Zohar. Why over here does the Torah have to express it as if in an uncertainty way? Yada katuv lemnot, v'kan katuv kishloshet alfa yish. Zayin shelo yada b'diuk. I mean, here they didn't know exactly. Elaheim banav shal bilam yunus v'yumru shahaya shkulim kishloshet alfa ish. So he wants to tell us how powerful these two were, that when it says kishloshet alfa ish, that when these two died, it was as if the 3,000 had died. That was the power of these two. So he's still asking, so they died then? How did he fly with them? He knew all forms of sorcery. I think sorcery is magic. It's more than that. Kishuf is accumulating the forces of evil. Again, from all we've said this morning, is not that a dictator is evil, and not that an army in control is evil. It is not where people do not have their freedom, which is evil, but on the contrary, the forces of evil have become manifested. It's the forces of evil that has to be done away with. not really destroying or removing one dictator, because as long as the evil remains, anti-Semitism died with Hitler. Anti-Semitism died with the SS. Nobody believes that one. Why don't we believe it? Because anti-Semitism continues to fester and grow. So it was not these people that had to be annihilated and to remove consequently evil from the world, as this was the slogan in World War II. The war to end all wars. No, you don't end the war when you end the physical manifestation of the evil. What you must do, and that's why Kabbalah finally has come into the forefront of this war against evil, because it is the only way that you can permanently, eternally remove evil, because we are not going to remove people from our midst. We want to remove the evil that these people make manifest. And if you remove the people, does that mean the evil has now disappeared? No less than the flipping of the switch to the opposition. Darkness returns. Returns. By a natural process. If the light force is not present, if people are not drawing the light force into this world, and that's why, if you want to know why they're against the Kabbalah Center, it's so obvious. Who's against the Kabbalah Center? Satan. Because we're talking about bringing the light force, flipping the switch, and that is what's going to eliminate. And if a collective consciousness, then it'll be Bila Mavet Lanes, because it requires consciousness. Not removing your enemy, your physical enemy. There'll be another one to wake up and rise up a moment after you've destroyed this one. History taught us that. The same thing here. He knew all of the evil that existed in the world. Yes, his two sons were dead. However, the knowledge that his two sons had, that he did not have, he also took their knowledge, their consciousness of how to create and manifest evil in the world. That's what he took with him. Pinchas Za'u Shaya Adam Echat Parach Ba'avir. And he saw someone suddenly fly up, literally. And suddenly he was out of sight of the eye. And he said to his people, is there anybody who knows how to fly after him? That means it was not only Bilam, but there were others who knew how to fly. So this idea of knowing how to fly, when we say that within the next 6 years, we will all know how to fly. You won't have to worry about your 405 parking lot anymore. You don't have to use your car. You won't even have the expense. You just go wherever you want to go by flying within 6 years. The reason it may not happen, because there will be many Jews who are much brighter and smarter than us and say it's too good to be true. And so they will, by their consciousness, prevent it from taking place sooner. But that consciousness will have to be destroyed. We can either destroy it voluntarily, or, as the Zohar says, unfortunately, that consciousness will be destroyed by other violent means that he describes. Because he saw that it was Bilam. Tzilya beno shel shevet Dan kav lakach hashlita hasholetet al kshafim uparach acharav. Doesn't tell us what. But what did Tzilya do? The son of Shevet Dan rose up, took lakach hashlita hasholetet al kshafim. He took the forces that can create dominion on a bakar. On a bakar, says the Zohar. I have to confess, and I'm confessing here, it'll be on tape. I did not know the power of the alphabet, of the Ana B'Kol. I only knew, my teacher told me. Why he never told me the origin of it and so on, whatever the reasons were. Didn't know, he just told me that the force of Ana B'Kol is so powerful. Okay, so powerful. I guess he didn't want to tell me because it needed just a few months ago, because I'm writing a book, and I'm writing on Ana B'Kol, that I discover the power of Ana B'Kol. As I mentioned before, the most powerful configuration of letters of the Hebrew alphabet, and the words that were structured later. The actual Ana B'Kol is the alphabet Gimel, Ana B'Kol Gedulat, and the Yud, right? And the Taf and the Tzadik. This is the power. Then along came Reb Nechunya ben Akana, who created the word configuration. But actually it's the 42 letters. That controls Kshafim. Because it says here, V'lakach hashlita hasholetet al Kshafim. He took along with him. It reminds me of a true joke that once, a few years ago, they had written me up, but it was before our time. I say a few years ago, I'm going back to 1981, where a whole page write-up in the Los Angeles Times on the January 1st edition. Everybody was home reading it, but it shows you the type wasn't there. A whole page about me at the Kabbalah Center. Anyway, they wanted a photograph. So this person who arranged the interview called up the photographer. He says, he wants him to come down. He says, well, listen, I'm coming down, but what is this Kabbalah? Will he have it with him? Is it a machine, or is it, what is this Kabbalah? Since it's me and Kabbalah. Like it's, a physical thing. So he wanted to know, will it be too big for him to include me into the, in the picture together with this machine or whatever it was? What did it mean that he flew with a shlita? You mean there was a machine or a plane or what? No. Well, it doesn't mean that. It means the Ana B'Kol. It doesn't say so. But when you read the Tikkun Zohar and the way my teacher gave us the explanation on the Tikkun Zohar, you realize the power of Ana B'Kol. And he flew after him. And when he saw Tzilya, running after him, flying after him, he literally, just like we know there's 7 Alan belts, I think that's what he's referring to, he was able to break through 5 of these atmospheres. And he became lost. He disappeared from the eye of Tzilya. As nistaken Tzilya came nistaken. I mean, he went into confusion. He didn't know what to do. Pinchas had him kolo elav. We think we can talk to someone in a space shuttle outside of our atmosphere without wires. But then again, they do have transmitters and receiver sets and so on. But here Pinchas was able to communicate with Tzilya. It's a real story that could make a good movie, I guess, too. Pinchas hated kolo elav. Pinchas raised his voice to him. Hatzel shel hataninim harotzim al kol anashim hafoch b'sha'arotecha miyad yadat Tzilya v'gila orechahu v'nichnas elav. Didn't know how to penetrate. He didn't know how to penetrate those, what we know today to be Van Allen belts. Just like you cannot send up a space shuttle anytime you want to. There are times when the Van Allen belts open up, and then the space shuttle goes through. If those Van Allen belts are locked, the space shuttle cannot penetrate into another atmosphere. Okay. Unless it's 7 Van Allen belts, right? 7 Van Allen belts, and the space shuttle cannot penetrate. Now they know by trial and error. They found out where they're open, but we know what that means. I didn't make a study, maybe I should. Why it opens now and it closes another day? No doubt. No doubt. It is the time when the light, what's a lock? It's a lock. The absence of freedom. Meaning, when they could be opened. Here, he gave him this code, which he says, the shadow of the taninim harotzim al kol nechashim. There are these taninim, snakes. Seems they're, if you want to, it's a wonderful Zohar. Rabbi Ashlag explains in detail exactly what he's referring to. But what I want to leave you with, because we're concluding now, that he showed him the path on how he can penetrate. Although he created, and he went up with the shlita, with the dominion, which dominates over the kshafim. But sometimes you can't find him. Sometimes you can't find the enemy. You may have the complete security shield intact, but he's out there. And you're not certain how long you can maintain the security shield. And what happens if because he's out there, remember here, it was not enough that he was going out with all of this weaponry to overcome Bilam, but he also had to seek out and destroy him, to seek him out. He couldn't find him. Sometimes we don't know who the enemy is around us. As King David said, God, I'll watch for my enemies, but you please protect me from my friends. And that doesn't mean that there are friends who are double agents, that they are really our enemies, but that they don't know. And because of ignorance, and as we know, ignorance is no excuse. Ignorance of the laws are no excuse. And therefore they can come in and create this havoc. And so here the purpose was to reach out and destroy Bilam. And so he gave him this code, and immediately Tzidya knew, and he knew the path that had to be taken, the wavelength. Orachahu, and what are we talking about? In space, what ora, what path? Umiyad nigala Bilam, and immediately Bilam appeared, v'yadu shneim lefnei Pinchas, and they both descended in front of Pinchas. With this consciousness that we can eliminate all of this darkness. Amen.